How was the first civilization in history born? Welcome to Collapse, where history comes to life and each video immerses you in the destiny of those who shaped the world. Today, prepare yourself to cross the veil of time and retrace the very origins of organized humanity. Long before empires, kings, and legends, in the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, arises a mystery that is over 5,000 years old, the birth of the very first civilization. There, in Mesopotamia, humans tamed the waters, drafted the first laws, built the first cities. It all starts with a need to survive. But very quickly, this need becomes ambition, order, power. From simple villages, kingdoms are born. From agricultural rights, eternal myths. History takes shape. Warfare, commerce, justice. Everything is invented, structured, imposed. But before embarking on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you and have a good journey. The long process of sedentarization and cultural development between 7000 and 3500 before Christ marks a major transformation in human history. Communities scattered around the world gradually transition from nomadic hunter-gatherers to organized farmers and herders. This global turning point follows various rhythms and forms, depending on geographical, climatic, and cultural conditions. To fully grasp its scope, one must first contextualize these changes within the Holocene climatic period, examine the main Neolithic centers where agriculture and animal husbandry took root, and consider how ancient trading routes facilitated the circulation of raw materials. Sedentarization also very early on incited inequalities and chiefdoms, paving the way for the complex social organization of subsequent millennia. At the end of the last glaciation, around 10,000 to 9,500 before Christ, immense glaciers covered a large part of the northern hemisphere. Cold temperatures and precipitation affected the distribution of flora and fauna. Around 7,000 before Christ, the climate enters a stable phase characteristic of the Holocene, promoting the expansion of various wild plants and the gradual recolonization by certain animals of vast territories once considered glacial refuges. With the warming, precipitation patterns change, forests spread over former semi-desert areas, and wildlife benefits from new wet zones. In the Fertile Crescent, Levant, Mesopotamia, and parts of Anatolia, populations find themselves surrounded by species amenable to domestication. Elsewhere in Asia, Europe, or the Americas, the process is slower, based on the ecological conditions unique to each region. The more predictable climate allows seasonal hunter-gatherer camps to evolve into semi-permanent or permanent villages, facilitating seed storage and the protection of animals under domestication. This post-glacial transition is not homogeneous. Some river basins become fertile again, while other areas recede due to aridification. The melting glaciers gradually open pathways, allowing humans to move into new habitable lands. Benefiting from milder climates, human societies reorganize their relationship with the environment. More than just a temperature change, this transformation engenders new ways to cultivate land, select and domesticate wild species, and then build the first community structures. In this dramatically changing climate context, several regions emerge as Neolithic centers, where agriculture and animal husbandry appear, sometimes independently. The most emblematic is the Fertile Crescent, including Palestine, Syria, Iraq, and the western edge of Iran. Around 8,000, 7,000 Trassel. Before Christ, wheat, barley, goats, and sheep are domesticated, suited to the hills and plateaus. Habitats become larger, and collective structures appear to store harvests, benefiting from fertile alluvial soils and a favorable hydrographic network for irrigation. In Egypt, along the banks of the Nile, the pre-dynastic period emerges somewhat later, around 5000 before Christ, with villages such as those of the Badari culture linked to the management of the Nile's floodplains. This culture, known for its refined pottery and funeral practices, precedes the Naqada culture that sets the stage for pharaonic organization. Early crops include barley, emmer wheat, and various legumes, while the breeding of cattle, sheep, and goats is evidenced by bone remains. Simultaneously, in the Indus region at Mehrgarh, Pakistan, as early as 7000 before Christ, agricultural practices were based on indigenous varieties of wheat, barley, and millets. The domestication of the zebu, as well as the production of rudimentary pottery for storing grains and water, are evidenced. Ancient exchanges with neighboring Afghanistan for lapis lazuli are also visible. Further east, in China, the emergence of Neolithic cultures follows the improvement of the climate. The sites of Peilagang around 7000 before Christ in the Yellow River Basin and those of the Yangshao culture around 5000 before Christ testify to advanced efforts to cultivate millet, a hardy cereal adapted to lowest soils. Meanwhile, in the south, the domestication of rice is facilitated by wet land. Pottery from this period, decorated with geometric patterns, shows a nascent mastery of firing techniques and clay shaping, facilitating the preparation and preservation of food. In Europe, the Neolithic arrives a little later, around 6000 to 5500 before Christ, originating from the Near East. The linear pottery culture, or LBK, develops around 5500 before Christ in Central Europe. Its craftsmen produce pottery adorned with linear patterns, and the longhouse becomes the typical dwelling. Agriculture spreads rapidly, with slash and burn techniques to clear and develop fields. Populations cultivate wheat, barley, legumes, and raise cattle, pigs, and sheep. In the Americas, the adoption of agriculture is distinct. Around 7000 to 5000 before Christ, in the region of present-day Mexico, populations domesticate various cucurbits, including the gourd, and begin selecting maize from wild teosinte. Ceramic production remains rare, with a focus on agricultural experimentation and subsistence, combining rudimentary cultivation and gathering. In the Andes, the domestication of llamas and vicuñas will occur later, but this process is incubating thanks to the familiarity of hunter-gatherers with local fauna. As agriculture consolidates in various hearths, the world is not isolated. Rudimentary trade routes already favor the exchange of raw materials. Even though the major trade routes of antiquity are yet to come, archaeology shows the presence of foreign resources in several contemporary sites. Obsidian, a volcanic rock prized for its sharp tools, is found in multiple areas of the Near East, while its main sources are in Anatolia, present-day Turkey, or on certain volcanic sites. Neolithic groups travel long distances to obtain it, enabling the manufacture of blades, arrowheads, and scrapers superior to flint tools. From the Persian Gulf, nacre is also imported, often used in decorative ornaments for rituals. Similarly, carnelian from the Indus Valley circulates westward, attesting to indirect contacts with the Middle East. This red stone, easy to polish, is used to make pendants or beads. Archaeologists suppose that, through chains of barter, these prestige objects change hands several times before reaching remote villages. Beyond aesthetics, these exchanges demonstrate the emergence of specialized groups in the production, transformation, and transport of prized goods. These modest networks lay the foundation for future trade circuits. The occasional movement of craftsmen, hunters, or envoys foreshadows lasting connections. Excavations confirm that from this time, the need for rare materials motivates sometimes risky expeditions across terrains, deserts, or waterways. These beginnings of long-distance circulation lay the first stones of an embryonic globalization that will link, millennia later, the great classical civilizations. With sedentarization, the gradual accumulation of agricultural resources allows Neolithic communities to store and redistribute food surpluses. This prosperity creates differences in status between individuals or families, as certain groups better control livestock, water, or land, thanks to improved tools and techniques. The longhouses in Central Europe illustrate this extended family organization, housing family, livestock, and reserves. Power often concentrates in the hands of an elder, patriarch, or small council, responsible for managing stocks and making vital decisions. In Anatolia, Göbekli Tepe, built between 9600 and 8200 before Christ, and Çatalhöyük, dated around 7400-6200 before Christ, show other forms of community authority. Göbekli Tepe features round megalithic monuments and decorated pillars intended for collective cults or ceremonies, requiring a substantial workforce coordinated by religious or charismatic leaders. Çatalhöyük is a dense village without streets, accessible from the rooftops, with frescoes, burials under the houses, and sanctuaries, indicating a domestic religion under the control of notables or priests. The rise of chieftainships is also linked to conflict management. Evidence of violence on some European and Asian sites, traumatized skeletons, defensive palisades, shows that rivalries for fertile lands and strategic water points become frequent. Small warrior groups, led by unifying chiefs, form to protect or conquer territories. Communities also develop symbols of power. Necklaces, scepters, polished axes, and ornaments denote an individual's status. The possession of prestigious goods serves to distinguish and legitimize authority. For archaeologists, progressive hierarchization is observed in more elaborate graves, unequally distributed funeral offerings, and recurring iconographic motifs. When comparing Neolithic habitats from different continents, there is no single model of hierarchy. Structures often remain egalitarian, but tend towards embryonic forms of chieftainships. Sometimes, a group of elders or religious specialists exerts decisive influence. Elsewhere, a war chief or an elder imposes decisions. In almost all Neolithic societies, this social stratification marks the beginnings of more sophisticated political organizations characteristic of urban civilizations. This panorama, from 7000 to 3500 before Christ, shows the diversity of pathways in the transition from a nomadic lifestyle based on hunting and gathering to a sedentary one based on agriculture and animal husbandry. Post-glacial climate warming facilitates the domestication of new plant and animal species in several distinct centers. From there, long-distance exchanges are born, embryos of a future more extensive trade. The economic and social transformation generates inequalities, giving rise to the first chieftainships and forms of centralized authority exercised by notables, priests, or war chiefs. These fundamental traits prepare the emergence of historical civilizations, while anchoring from the Neolithic durable elements of the human condition: hierarchy, task specialization, aspiration to prestige, collaboration, and innovation within growing communities. In the south of present-day Iraq, in a vast alluvial plain, lies Lower Mesopotamia, often considered one of the cradles of civilization. Its name, Mesopotamia, means land between two rivers. The Tigris and the Euphrates have shaped a unique landscape over millennia, where agriculture, fishing, and animal husbandry could develop despite a challenging climate. Between unpredictable floods, fertile sedimentation, and inaccessible marshes, this region offered from the earliest antiquity an exceptional potential for the growth of organized communities. This complex mix of environmental constraints and unique resources has shaped the destiny of settled populations. The Tigris and the Euphrates both rise in eastern Anatolia in present-day Turkey. As they flow southward, their waters gather fine and fertile sediments that form the great alluvial plain of lower Mesopotamia. Their courses varied slightly over the centuries due to successive floods that altered the banks. The Tigris, being faster, empties a bit further north, while the slower Euphrates meanders around large areas before joining its neighbor. They form a delta leading to the Persian Gulf, creating wetlands rich in clays and nutrients. This nourishing alluvium was key to Mesopotamia's agricultural and demographic prosperity. The silt from the annual floods regenerated the land, allowing abundant harvests, notably of barley and wheat, after domestication and selection. These floods, sometimes irregular, could cause devastating inundations. The sediments were both a source of life and destruction, prompting the development of elaborate irrigation and hydraulic regulation systems. Despite these dangers, the presence of these two rivers in an otherwise arid region was a major advantage, fostering the emergence of complex societies based on the mastery of water and the valorization of the soil. As the Tigris and Euphrates approach their common delta, the landscape transforms into vast marshlands, true labyrinths of channels, reed banks, and flooded zones. In antiquity, these marshes were rich in fish, birds, and reeds, a crucial material for light constructions, mats, lightweight boats, or shelters. The populations could fish, hunt, and cultivate some drained plots. These marshes also served as a natural barrier against external armies, sometimes protecting communities on islands or banks. Moving away from the river, one would find semi-arid steppes, then desert zones with sporadic precipitation where pluvial agriculture was impossible. These areas served as grazing grounds for flocks of sheep and goats nourished by sparse grasses. Shepherds followed seasonal transhumance routes to distant water points, while others remained near villages close to irrigation channels. In the most arid parts, there were also deposits of salt, precious for the conservation of food, and bitumen, used for watertightness of boats, sealing of canals, and various ritual uses. The availability of these resources varied according to the proximity to the river or its tributaries. Reeds grew in the wetlands, while salt and bitumen required longer distances to travel. Lower Mesopotamia thus offered a mosaic of landscapes, both lush in the floodplains, unpredictable in marshy areas, and austere in the steppes and deserts. This ecological diversity allowed for the coexistence of varied economies, creating a balance between sedentism and nomadism, irrigated agriculture and pastoralism, fishing and trade. Despite its potential, Lower Mesopotamia faced major problems. One crucial issue was the progressive salinization of soils. When irrigation water evaporated quickly under hot summers, it left behind crusts of salt harmful to crops. Without adequate drainage and crop rotation, plots became unsuitable for cereal cultivation. Records show that the loss of fertile lands due to salt could force the relocation of villages or drastically reduce yields. The maintenance of canals was another challenge. Irrigation systems had to be constantly cleared of sediment and blockages caused by reeds or debris. Without regular maintenance, canals would clog and overflow, flooding fields and homes. Sudden floods would occur during torrential rains upstream in the Zagros Mountains or the Anatolian highlands, washing away dikes, dams, and sometimes villages. These realities imposed collective organization. Religious and political authorities mobilized a significant workforce to maintain hydraulic works. Mandatory labor or taxes in kind ensured the efficiency and durability of the canals. Inhabitants had to balance the use of water to irrigate and enrich the soil without suffering unexpected floods or excess salinity. Well managed, these natural challenges turned into assets, as controlling water meant controlling prosperity and economic power. The geography of Lower Mesopotamia required constant adaptation, but offered a major strategic positioning. The two rivers opened to the north and east, towards the Zagros Mountains, today between Iran, Iraq, and Turkey, rich in minerals like lead, copper, and tin, essential for making tools and weapons. The routes crossing these mountains allowed access to luxury products, notably rare wood in the plain. Caravans transporting these goods inevitably passed through the region, making Mesopotamia an important transit point. In the south, the delta formed by the Tigris and Euphrates opened onto the Persian Gulf, facilitating maritime connections with coastal ports. From the earliest historical times, trade or reconnaissance expeditions crossed these waters to reach the Oman Peninsula, at the eastern mouth of the Arabian Peninsula, where there were copper deposits crucial for metallurgy. Further afield, navigation made it possible to reach the territories corresponding to present-day Bahrain, identified with the ancient kingdom of Dilmun, then the shores towards the Indus. These endeavors required knowledge in shipbuilding, astronomy for navigation, and diplomacy to negotiate access to resources. This position between interior steppe, mountains to the northeast, and sea to the south, contributed to the rise of the great cities of Lower Mesopotamia. Local populations could import or exchange metals, wood, precious stones, pearls, fabrics, and other products from distant lands. These flows fueled local crafts: potters, weavers, goldsmiths, metallurgists, who exploited various raw materials to innovate and multiply prestige objects. These transformed products, jewelry, ceramics, or metal tools, were then redistributed to neighboring societies. In this environment, the construction of diplomatic and commercial networks was strategic. The cities of Lower Mesopotamia sometimes allied to secure routes, establish checkpoints, or negotiate with mountain communities. A dispute over a section of road or ford on the Euphrates could disrupt the arrival of metals for a long time, halting the production of tools essential for agriculture. Local chiefs, called Ensi or Lugal, quickly understood that managing such a coveted crossroads ensured prosperity and power. Controlling access to the Persian Gulf, through which Oman pearls and copper passed, represented prestige and economic benefit. Lower Mesopotamia, from ancient times, was both demanding and generous. Water could instantly destroy dug canals, salt could sterilize fields, and marshy terrains made movement difficult. But astute management of resources, with maintained canals and repaired dams, offered abundant harvests and a major commercial role. It is no coincidence that Uruk, Ur, and Lagash emerged in this fertile corridor. These cities, supported by agricultural wealth, embarked on the erection of temples, the establishment of administrations to manage rations, and the creation of long-distance trade routes. Without this particular geography, the development of an advanced civilization would have been different. Each element of the landscape, canal, field, marsh, or ford stood as both a risk and an opportunity. The ancient Mesopotamians, through experiences, took advantage of these circumstances to establish an unprecedented socio-economic organization. Ultimately, Lower Mesopotamia shows how a geographical environment shapes a population. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers provided an ideal environment for irrigated agriculture while demanding precise water management to avoid disasters and waste. Marshes, the steppe, and the desert imposed an ingenious distribution of tasks: fishing and reed harvesting in humid areas, transhumant livestock in the steppe, salt and bitumen harvesting in hostile areas. Natural challenges such as salinization and canal maintenance pushed for coordination and innovation. This positioning, a crossroads between the Zagros Mountains and the maritime route of the Persian Gulf, made Lower Mesopotamia a crucial pivot for regional and beyond commercial exchanges. The Mesopotamian landscapes are not merely backdrops. They act as major actors in history and influence the structure of human societies. Lower Mesopotamia saw the birth of some of the first urban centers thanks to its fertile, complex, and strategic geography. Between the nurturing river, protective marshes, and mineral resources accessible via mountain routes, a unique space emerges where nature and humanity challenge and assist each other. This dynamic, forged over centuries of experimentation, created the foundational legacy of the Mesopotamian plain, whose influence is still felt in the history of the Near East. During the period from 6500 to 6000 before Christ, the Samarra culture developed along the Tigris from southeastern Turkey to northern Iraq. Previously, nomadic communities settled down thanks to a warmer and more stable climate. The alluvial landscape, crossed by tributaries, favored nascent agriculture. To irrigate their crops, these populations installed small dams and rudimentary canals, which allowed better control of water, anticipation of climatic hazards, and increased yields. This surplus of wheat and barley promoted storage and the demographic growth of the villages. Excavations at key sites like Tel Es-Sawan have revealed mud brick dwellings and meticulous craftsmanship. Clay figurines painted to represent humans or animals are often found associated with domestic spaces or rudimentary sanctuaries, possibly votive objects, fertility symbols, or ornaments. They reflect a society seeking new forms of religious and artistic expression. The rise of pottery decorated with geometric patterns signals technical refinement. Potters mastered kiln firing, improving the durability of containers and their use for preservation. These innovations, combined with collective coordination around irrigation, foreshadow the future sophistication of water management in Mesopotamia and lay the foundation for more pronounced social stratification. The emergence of the Ubaid culture, around 5900 to 5200 before Christ, marks a decisive turning point in southern Mesopotamia. Located south of the Samarra zone, it extends near the Persian Gulf, around Tel al-Ubaid and Eridu. The geography presents challenges: abundant but unpredictable water, clay soils requiring drainage. Despite this, communities improved inherited irrigation, regulated the water collectively under the leadership of chiefs or priests, and built earth structures requiring labor and organization, a precursor to centralized authority. Agricultural mastery favored new specializations and set the stage for urban life. Ubaid architecture is distinguished by tripartite plans, with 3 spaces around a central hall for communal and sometimes ritual activities. The first large house temples appeared, more imposing than ordinary dwellings, centralizing storage, collective management, and nascent cults. Altars and rudimentary decorations, paintings, terracotta reliefs, attest to the emergence of an elite organizing rituals and agricultural redistribution, contributing to the formation of a complex social structure in Lower Mesopotamia. The remains of Eridu illustrate the transition from an egalitarian society to a stratified one, with a progressive monumentalization of buildings, indicative of authority linked to the local cult. The Ubaid culture extends beyond the Mesopotamian plain, with Ubaid objects found in eastern Arabia and the Levant, evidence of early contacts and exchanges. This diffusion demonstrates the ability to propagate technical, architectural, and social innovations, laying the foundation for a developing civilization. The daily life of Ubaid populations is characterized by a growth in artisanal skills, from linen weaving to the production of various tools. The cultivation of flax promoted textile production, with women responsible for spinning and weaving, playing a fundamental role in the domestic economy and the exchange of goods. Simple garments begin to differentiate social statuses, notably through textiles dyed or adorned with geometric motifs. Mastery of stonework leads to the creation of flint tools, essential for harvesting cereals and preparing food. In addition to lithic tools, the use of native copper emerges, rare but offering new possibilities. Early blacksmiths heat the ore at low temperatures to produce rudimentary blades or points, initiating metallurgy. These technological innovations, limited in volume, reflect a willingness to experiment and adapt. Pottery firing techniques improve, resulting in better quality storage and cooking vessels. Each household typically has a kiln, with spaces for drying and preparing clay. Spiritual life impregnates daily life through rituals in domestic spaces or house temples. Clay figurines, more complex than before, play a symbolic role. Artisans develop a rudimentary iconography, mixing naturalistic and abstract motifs to represent deities, protective animals, or offering scenes. The early cultic gestures seem centered on the fertility of fields, livestock, or the community. Votive deposits of seeds, miniature pottery, or animal remains illustrate this concern. One also observes embryonic forms of accounting, with clay tokens in cones, spheres, or tetrahedrons, symbolizing quantities of goods exchanged. Grouped in clay envelopes called bullae, then recorded on simplified pictographic tablets, these tokens foreshadow a nascent writing system. Each sign refers to a product or a unit of measure, a process stemming from a practical need for managing surpluses and transactions, prefiguring cuneiform writing. Daily life, still rural, begins in administrative and social complexity. The fabric of Ubaid society mixes refined artisanal and agricultural know-how with the beginnings of organization, heralding future milestones of Mesopotamian civilization. During the Middle and Late Ubaid period, between approximately 5200 and 4000 Dasan before Christ, Lower Mesopotamia witnessed a progressive development toward more complex and structured forms of life. In these alluvial plains, marshes, and vast desert spaces, the emergence of extensive irrigation systems and the first proto-urban centers marked a crucial step in social and economic organization. Communities transitioned from local management to forms administered by religious elites, heralding the advent of the Sumerian city-state. The vestiges reveal evolutions in architecture, pottery, and social hierarchy. The Ubaid, beyond a material culture, was a cultural horizon, spreading ideas and techniques beyond Mesopotamia. The mastery of water became a major challenge for these populations located along the Tigris and Euphrates, who sought to control the beneficial or devastating seasonal floods. A network of canals stretched over great distances, mobilizing all available forces. Ditches dug by hand, and earth dikes directed water to cultivable plots, improving agricultural yields. This irrigation system, rudimentary at first, was perfected and connected several settlements. At the center of this system, priest administrators imposed themselves. Their spiritual and social legitimacy stemmed from their role in organizing hydraulic works, ensuring everyone's contribution to the maintenance of the canals. These decisions went beyond mere coordination, announcing a centralization of power aiming to guarantee access to water for all. The canal network thus became a foundation of the emergence of more complex political structures. Material vestiges, pottery shards, and abandoned tools bear witness to this collective management. The sediments in some canals show the frequency of dredging and the extent of the workforce. Modest granaries and storage areas equipped with measuring tools attest to a regulated distribution of harvests. The canal networks were a major achievement of the Middle and Late Ubaid, placing irrigated agriculture at the heart of community organization and foreshadowing future economic mechanisms. Parallel to the expansion of irrigated areas and the growth of hamlets connected by these canals, Ubaid society became more differentiated. Previously egalitarian, communities gradually showed distinctions between groups and individuals. Graves bear witness to this evolution. Some, richer, contain prestige objects like stone or bone seal stamps, which serve to seal jars and chests, symbolizing control of goods and status. Some funerary deposits reveal varied offerings, carefully crafted pottery, terracotta figurines, native copper jewelry, or even more elaborate adornments. The difference between these graves and modest burials, with few objects, reveals increased social stratification. This funerary wealth seems linked to dominant lineages capable of transmitting their rank. These families likely controlled water exploitation, the coordination of communal projects, and the management of trade routes, reinforcing their power. Hierarchy also manifested in domestic architecture, with dwellings ranging from modest to large multi-room constructions. Access to rare ceramics or exotic goods, such as exotic shells or colored pigments, was reserved for some. The emerging elite, structured around chiefs or dignitaries, consolidated itself through shared rituals, probably orchestrated by priest administrators responsible for irrigation systems. This group facilitated the mobilization of the workforce for large projects and distributed resources and privileges according to established rules. Among the representative sites of the Ubaid period's development, Eridu holds a prominent place. Located in present-day southern Iraq, it is considered the oldest city in the region, and, in some accounts, in the world. Excavations have revealed a remarkable religious complex, the Ubaid Temple, with several successive architectural layers. The remains show enlargements, from simple mud brick rooms to more elaborate structures with worship spaces and inner courtyards. At the center, there is a cella, the most sacred room dedicated to the tutelary deity. Cult practices were concentrated there. The population offered various foodstuffs and fresh fish, a symbol of prosperity linked to water. an essential resource for irrigated agriculture. The grand ceremonies allowed for strengthening community ties and legitimizing the role of religious elites, tasked with maintaining harmony between the earthly and divine worlds. The analysis of the occupation levels shows that the temple also played an administrative role. The adjoining rooms served as storage spaces, and craft activities such as pottery likely occurred there under institutional control. This model of a religious and organizational center, concentrating resource management and collective rights, appears as an embryonic form of the temple palace of later eras. In Eridu, the close link between the sacred, governance, and economy that would shape Sumerian urban life is evident. The innovations and practices of the Middle and Late Ubaid period were not limited to Lower Mesopotamia. The characteristic pottery, finely crafted earthenware in brown or greenish-gray hues, spread to eastern Arabia and the northern Levant, as evidenced by identical shards discovered far from the region of origin, indicating trade networks and temporary migrations. Other items, such as seal stamps, found at several extra-Mesopotamian sites, show that a common language of identification or exchange protocols had been established. The routes used for these exchanges probably employed rivers, where rafts transported goods over long distances, as well as overland routes through arid areas. By sea along the Persian Gulf, or through passes toward Iran and beyond, these routes fostered an early regional interconnection. Local populations, in contact with the Ubaid culture, adopted certain pottery techniques or integrated new motifs into their production. These interactions went beyond simple barter, creating a groundwork of mutual influences that would nourish several subsequent civilizations, from the Levant to Arabia. In the northern Levant, the discovery of Ubaid pottery in tombs or dwellings illustrates their integration into a distinct cultural universe, demonstrating an adaptation of their uses. This permeability to Mesopotamian styles foreshadowed the expansion of exchanges during the Uruk period, when trade and techniques intensified. Without direct political domination, the Ubaid presence wove a network of shared influences. In this early globalization of the Near East, Lower Mesopotamia became a cultural hub and a circulation node, preparing for the advent of great historical cities. The era of the Middle and Late Ubaid remains a foundational milestone in Mesopotamian urban history. Towards the end of the 5th millennium before Christ, the Mesopotamian region experienced significant upheavals that radically transformed the way of life of its inhabitants. This era, known as the Archaic Uruk period, marks a decisive turning point in the history of the ancient Near East. The city of Uruk, sometimes called Erech in some ancient accounts, located in modern-day Iraq near the Euphrates, rapidly developed into one of the largest urban centers in the region. Technical innovations, demographic expansion, and the emergence of complex administrative structures characterize this urban revolution and lay the foundations for an influential urban civilization. We will examine the demographic boom, major technological advances, the emergence of a ration-based economy, and the development of artistic and symbolic forms in Uruk between 4000 and 3500 before Christ. The demographic growth at the beginning of the 4th millennium before Christ is an unprecedented phenomenon in this region. In a few centuries, the population increased from a few hundred to over 10,000 individuals, or even more, according to some archaeological estimates. This boom is explained by the abundance of resources along the Euphrates, which encouraged the settlement of surrounding agricultural communities attracted to Uruk. The gradual mastery of irrigation increased cereal production, requiring more labor, The city's geographical position, close to nascent trade routes, encouraged the settlement of merchants and craftsmen. The concentration of population resulted in the emergence of specialized neighborhoods dedicated to pottery, metallurgy, or the processing of agricultural products, signaling social complexity and structured management. The development of Uruk also relied on several technical innovations, revolutionizing craftsmanship and mobility. The fast potter's wheel enabled serial production of more regular and fine ceramics thanks to the rapid rotation of the wheel. The invention of the wagon with solid wheels made of assembled wooden planks offered new transportation possibilities on flat ground, although rudimentary compared to later spoked wheels. Finally, the square sail appeared on riverboats, facilitating navigation on the Euphrates and the Tigris. Thus, Uruk equipped itself with essential tools for controlling its expanding territory. Alongside technical advances, Uruk society developed an economic system based on the distribution of rations, often of cereals or processed products. At the center, the ration beakers, standardized earthenware containers, were linked to the organization of labor and resource control. Produced in large quantities, they precisely measured the portion allocated to each individual, whether worker, craftsman, or temple personnel. Urban authorities, often priest administrators, ensured that each category received the necessary supplies, fostering cohesion in a context of strong demographic growth. This system also simplified accounting by ensuring regular monitoring of production and consumption. Ancient archives, in the form of tokens and tablets, confirm these economic control practices, structuring daily life and reinforcing administration. The urban effervescence of Uruk was accompanied by an artistic and symbolic flowering in architecture and everyday objects. Cylinder seals, which appeared at the end of the 4th millennium before Christ, played a central role. These rolls engraved on stone or steatite marked the wet clay of pottery or administrative tablets, serving as a signature, a guarantee of authenticity, or a protective amulet. Their religious, animal, or mythological motifs demonstrate great mastery of engraving and a desire to represent a symbolic order in a hierarchical society. Monumental architecture was enriched with walls decorated with mosaics of colored clay cones, whose painted ends formed geometric patterns, rhythmically adorning the facades. This technique gave buildings, especially temples, a sumptuous and codified appearance intended to impress the faithful or symbolize divine power. Some buildings played an essential role in administration, considered as banks where economic resources were stored and managed. Offerings, commodities, and manufactured products were recorded there under the supervision of priest administrators who recorded the information on tablets. Thus, architecture, religious symbolism, and art supported the emergence of centralized power and inaugurated a tradition of monumental urbanism, influencing later civilizations. The Uruk Archaic period, 4000–3500 before Christ, marks a turning point in the development of the first large cities in Mesopotamia. The significant population growth, supported by irrigated agriculture and complex social organization, demonstrates the union of communities around ambitious collective projects. Technical advancements such as the fast potter's wheel, the solid-wheeled cart, and the square sail spurred economic growth and eased the flow of goods. The rationing system, with standardized beakers, incorporated accounting and redistribution principles that prefigure urban societies. Artistic manifestations such as cylinder seals or colored cone mosaics sanctified the urban space and made visible the central power. Monumental temples became centers of authority and storage, playing a central role in daily life and collective imagination. Between 4000 and 3500 before Christ, Uruk transformed into a laboratory of cultural, economic, and political innovations, initiating the birth of Mesopotamian civilization. These milestones in Lower Mesopotamia herald a sophisticated urbanism and an unprecedented social order. Uruk thus embodies the first planned city, a prelude to future Mesopotamian empires. Towards the end of the 4th millennium before Christ, in the alluvial plain of Lower Mesopotamia, a major upheaval occurs with the invention of writing and the rise of accounting. Communities along the major irrigation canals seek to better manage cereal production, herds, storage, and redistribution of resources in a complex context. Commercial exchanges intensify as the region often lacks certain materials and caravans travel greater distances. A rudimentary accounting logic is born to meet the needs of temples, which centralize the harvests of barley, dates, and livestock. Various devices are experimented with to ensure precise tracking, laying the foundations of a recording system. Writing gradually appears, motivated by the need to establish reliable records and document transactions, revolutionizing administrative practices and the expression of thought. In the early stages of accounting, stock managers used small clay forms called tokens or calculi to represent different quantities. A cone symbolized a sack of barley, a sphere, a herd of goats. These tokens were placed in hollow clay envelopes known as boulets, sometimes sealed with seals to guarantee authenticity. Then, to facilitate inspection, the tokens were imprinted on the external surface before being slipped inside, which led to abandoning the envelope. Signs were marked directly on flat clay tablets, reminiscent of the shape of tokens. This evolution, around 3400 before Christ, marks a major advance, the two-dimensional conceptualization on a flat medium of economic and administrative data, the starting point of a sustainable system. Once clay tablets were adopted, graphic signs were invented to represent not only the counted objects, but also the actions and actors related to transactions. Proto-cuneiform thus emerged in the mid-4th millennium, an effective pictographic system for noting the quantity of cereals, listing livestock, or establishing the origin of a batch. The first symbols are figurative: an ear for barley, a bovine head for cattle, a vessel for a container. These pictograms quickly simplify to speed execution, sometimes moving away from the initial shape. The numbering follows a sexagesimal principle based on base 60, practical for dividing and multiplying rations. In large institutions, this code evolves. Batch managers are identified, storage locations suggested, and grain qualities distinguished. To convey different numerical values, scribes use various signs depending on whether it's grains, livestock, or manufactured objects, which complicates reading but reflects the diversity of goods. Gradually, some pictograms become abstract, initiating the evolution towards stylized cuneiform signs. Each material or graphic change refines the transmission of information and facilitates resource control, mutually reinforcing economy and writing and paving the way to urban civilization. With the introduction of inscribed tablets, a new social role emerged, that of the scribe. In the early urban centers like Uruk, this specialist mastered the art of carving pictograms with a reed stylus. Their rigorous training, under the mentorship of experienced scribes, often associated with major temples, focused on recognizing hundreds of signs and their variants, as well as memorizing lexical lists that foreshadowed future dictionaries. Apprentices also copied standardized models to standardize writing. Through their work, they conveyed administrative and legal information, becoming institutional pillars in managing economic power. Beyond managing stocks, scribes drafted contracts, recorded wages in kind, and maintained distribution records. Their expertise was sought by religious institutions and political leaders. They calculated each worker's share of the harvest or delineated family debts. In case of conflict, the sealed tablets served as written proof. The legal logic remained rudimentary, but the scribe already affirmed themselves as a guarantor of transaction reliability. Temples, the locations of the first schools, ensured the training and transmission of this expertise. Many scribes specialized in archiving, preserving ancient documents, compiling inventories, and ensuring the institutional memory. The emergence of writing and accounting profoundly changed the organization of society in Lower Mesopotamia. An important share of goods, particularly barley, was now under the surveillance of scribes, whose tablets became indispensable for managing stocks and rationalizing exchanges. The food rations distributed to workers on irrigation projects or in workshops were meticulously recorded, reducing fraud and allowing for strict reserve planning. The concept of a contract took shape, laying the foundations of a nascent legal order with the writing of obligations, recording of payments, and authentication of transactions by a seal. This security encouraged the rise of long-distance trade agreements, enticing merchants and foreign caravans to travel the routes leading to the emerging cities. Institutional memory no longer relied solely on oral tradition, but became materialized through tangible archives, attesting commitments and outcomes. Beyond the economy, this intellectual tooling transformed collective representations. Religious institutions recorded hymns, lists of deities, and sacred places, preparing the emergence of a more elaborate literature. Temples gained authority by relying on writings, validating their role as guardians of the cosmic order and dispensers of benefits. Knowledge of numbers and the standardization of calculation encouraged the development of disciplines like measuring time and rudimentary cartography. The idea of keeping a record of events spread. Great offerings, ceremonies, and military conquests would be recounted with more precision. This connection between thought, language, and material support marked a crucial stage. Words were fixed on clay to traverse the ages and build the foundations of written civilization. Around 3100 before Christ, Lower Mesopotamia entered the period called Jemdet Nasr, which lasted until 2900 before Christ. This phase marked the end of late Uruk and the emergence of major socio-political changes with artistic diversification, strengthened administrative structures, and a rise in long-distance trade. During the century, pottery, resource management, and commerce evolved, heralding the appearance of complex city-states. One of the major traits of the Jemdet Nasr culture is the appearance of polychrome pottery with elaborate motifs, breaking away from previous sobriety. Vases, bowls, and jars featured animal scenes or geometric figures painted in red, black, and white. Artisans mastered the firing process better, allowing for sharp contrasts. These innovations were a response to a search for aesthetics and translated into prestige linked to clan or regional identities. The representations of goats, bulls, or stylized birds reflected the importance of livestock, hunting, or divine entities linked to animals. Some decorated pottery was used during religious rituals, diplomatic exchanges, banquets, or buried with the deceased, highlighting their place in funerary beliefs. These objects also reveal the existence of specialized workshops where shapes and decorations are standardized. The craftsmanship is transmitted through direct apprenticeship, ensuring the continuity of regional styles. Despite local differences, similarities attest to a circulation of techniques and a growing cultural proximity in the Mesopotamian valley. This widespread adoption of polychrome decoration symbolizes the rise of an elaborate visual culture, present in urbanism, rites, and the affirmation of collective identities. These innovations mark the emergence of a new relationship with symbolism. Protective animals, sacred hues, narrative motifs illustrating local myths. Images become vectors of identity and collective memory. The potters of the Jemdet Nasr period contribute to a movement of innovation driven by demographic growth and the desire for distinction, paving the way for more advanced artistic developments. During the Jemdet Nasr period, a more defined administrative framework is established. Elaborate cylinder seals and clay tablets with numeral pictograms are used to inventory barley, wheat, or cattle, essential for the survival of communities. The management of irrigation channels becomes crucial to ensuring an equitable distribution of water along the Tigris and Euphrates. Official titles appear, probably held by clan leaders or priest administrators responsible for collecting and distributing resources. The mention of a White House in Uruk suggests the emergence of an institutional center coordinating religious and economic aspects. Even though political power is not yet centralized, rapprochements between local entities favor a progressive standardization. The seals mark goods and documents, outlining a control system announcing future Sumerian bureaucracies. Despite the relative autonomy of villages and small urban centers, uniformity is manifested in weights and measures. Rudimentary balance pieces and some standards show the need to normalize regional transactions. The increasing use of clay to seal jars or record transfers of goods indicates a heightened awareness of property and a need for legitimation. The emerging elites, religious or secular, use these administrative mechanisms to strengthen their influence, creating a hierarchy where only a minority masters writing and access to resources. This proto-state evolution is not yet a unified monarchy, but reveals a growing specialization of social functions, administering, producing, trading, defending. The ideological bases link terrestrial authority and divine approval, preparing the Sumerian dynasties to consolidate the royal function and establish a stable, though often competitive, political panorama in Lower Mesopotamia. During the Jemdet Nasr period, trade contacts extend far beyond the borders of the Mesopotamian plain. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, diorite from Oman, and precious wood from Lebanon bear witness to this. Lapis lazuli is used to make jewelry and votive objects for gods and leaders. Diorite is used to carve imposing statues and durable tools. Lebanese wood, notably cedar, fuels shipbuilding and carpentry, essential in a sparsely wooded region. These imports reveal land caravan routes and maritime paths via the Persian Gulf. The exchanges also concern know-how, such as metallurgical techniques and food preservation. Trade facilitates the dissemination of religious and cultural concepts, shaping an interconnected civilizational space. Mesopotamian elites encourage these exchanges to consolidate their prestige, negotiating alliances and treaties. The influx of rare materials requires an elaborate logistical organization, with the securing of routes and storage locations. The first forms of international accounting appear through seals and inscriptions recording the entry and exit of goods. River navigation is perfected, facilitating transport on the Euphrates and Tigris, while square sails travel along the Persian Gulf Coast. The Jemdet Nasr period thus lays the foundations of a regional globalization, influential in the history of the ancient Near East. The benefits of trade stimulate artisanal production, the adoption of foreign artistic styles, and linguistic mixing. Lower Mesopotamia becomes a crossroads where merchants, scribes, and travelers from diverse origins intersect. This vibrancy paves the way for future intercity alliances, luxury craftsmanship, and lasting diplomatic ties. The Jemdet Nasr period marks a moment when the local economy evolves into a vast network, a prelude to the flourishing of the great Sumerian civilizations. Around 3100 before Christ, Lower Mesopotamia takes a major step forward. Ceramic innovation, the establishment of an emerging administration, and the growth of trade signify the emergence of a more complex society, heralding the future developments of the Sumerian city-states. Between 2900 and 2600 before Christi, several urban centers form on the alluvial plains of southern Mesopotamia, outlining an unprecedented political landscape. Uruk, Kish, Lagash, and Umma stand out with characteristics that will shape Sumerian identity. Their location, often near canals of the Tigris and Euphrates, promotes irrigation and economic growth. Inhabitants build residential areas around a fortified core made of mud bricks, protecting both the population and resources. The concentric urban plans are organized around a sacred enclosures and a main temple situated on a slightly elevated platform, gradually evolving into ziggurats. These temples, spiritual and administrative centers, orchestrate collective life, store agricultural surplus, and oversee the cult. Ur benefits from access to the Persian Gulf and expands maritime trade. Uruk, a pioneer of innovations, remains an influential religious hub. Kish serves as a junction between Sumerians and Semitic populations, facilitating trade contacts. Lagash and Umma, rivals yet prosperous, develop an irrigated agriculture capable of producing surpluses. All express their autonomy and maintain political and trade networks among themselves. In these cities, two figures dominate power, the Ensi and the Lugal. The Ensi, governor-priest, is the administrative and religious leader linked to the main deity and responsible for the proper functioning of the temple, offerings, the balance between sacred and everyday life, as well as the management of cereal stocks and collective lands maintained by the workforce for canals, sowing, and harvesting. In times of conflict, the Lugal, great man or warrior king, gains importance through military prowess and the ability to defend the community. He leads military forces and organizes defensive or offensive campaigns. Initially temporary, this title becomes hereditary and challenges the authority of the Ensi. In several cities, these roles sometimes coexist with difficulty. Ancient inscriptions testify to rivalries between clans supporting the Ensi and those backing the Lugal. At times, an individual holds both titles, thus concentrating power. This evolution prepares the emergence of more complex institutions, marked by specialization, demographic growth, and competition for control of fertile lands. At the heart of the organization of the first city-states, the popular assembly is a collective body participating in decision-making. In the Sumerian context, it derives from advisory practices established in Neolithic villages. Comprised of notable individuals, heads of influential families, and sometimes representatives of various guilds, it convenes during political crises, intercity conflicts, or debates on resource distribution. The Council of Elders, the core of this decision-making body, includes members chosen for their experience, age, or negotiation skills, significantly influencing the balance of power. It can oppose arbitrary decisions by the Lugal or the Ensi, highlighting a form of political participation. However, modern democracy is absent, with decisions often taken by consensus within a narrow circle where social status and prestigious lineage are crucial. During times of major crises, such as flooding or the threat of invasion, the assembly can appoint a temporary military leader or impose restrictions on the distribution of food. This institutional flexibility allows Sumerian cities to adapt to unforeseen disruptions and ensure the survival of the group. Furthermore, the participation of various actors fosters a sense of community belonging. Temples, often gathering places, strengthen the bond between the assembly, the population, and the protective deities. Thus, the collective voice remains a key factor in the balance between religious forces, royal power, and economic issues. Soon, relations between city-states extend beyond territorial competition. Political and familial alliances are formed to consolidate peace, influence, and wealth. Marriages between ruling lineages play a crucial role in these diplomatic ties. A princess from Kish might marry a son of Ur, sealing a pact of non-aggression and cooperation. Marriage becomes a tool of negotiation and a symbol of rapprochement. Clay tablets in cuneiform or proto-cuneiform script formalize these matrimonial and political agreements, specifying dowries, clauses of mutual assistance, and offerings for tutelary deities. Preserved in the temple archives, they serve as genuine contracts, accompanied by solemn oaths, often pronounced before Inanna, a major goddess of fertility, love, and war. Her sanctuary in Uruk attracts elites and common people alike, eager for her divine blessing. Diplomacy also involves the exchange of precious gifts. Kish sends grains or draft animals to Umma, which in return provides linen textiles or refined pottery. Ambassadors circulate to renew treaties or celebrate religious events. These relationships last as long as all parties benefit, reinforcing relative stability. These alliances do not guarantee eternal peace. Diverging economic interests and tensions over irrigable land persist. Nevertheless, the shared management of water and canals requires a minimal agreement, laying the groundwork for peaceful coexistence. Diplomacy and marriage fit into a system where religion, politics, and economics intertwine, influencing the formation and cooperation of the first Sumerian city-states. These practices would pave the way for more centralized dynasties and increased cultural influence. From the earliest proto-urban villages in the Mesopotamian plain to the great city-states of the early dynastic period, religion played a central role in the lives of the Sumerians. The construction of vast temples, made of mud bricks, to honor multiple deities, and the establishment of complex rituals, testified to the importance of the gods in their worldview. Farmers, artisans, scribes, priests, or elites lived in a universe saturated with religious symbols where every natural phenomenon found its explanation in a myth. This forming Sumerian pantheon in the 4th and 3rd millennia before Christ laid the foundation for the Mesopotamian religious tradition, later inherited by the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Through stories, temples, and rituals, the society aimed to maintain a cosmic order that ensured the fertility of the lands, the security of the city, and political stability. The Sumerian pantheon gradually emerged by incorporating local and regional traditions in the form of specific deities. At its head was An, the god of the sky, sometimes referred to as Anu, embodying the celestial vault, cosmic sovereignty, original power, and divine legitimacy. He is often described as the Heavenly Father, the origin of all things, whose authority surpassed that of other gods. Enlil, associated with air and wind, had his main sanctuary in Nippur, in central Mesopotamia. He possessed the Tablets of Destiny, a mythical object guaranteeing authority over the world. He decides the fate of cities, unleashes or restrains the flood, and grants kingship. At the heart of political and religious concerns, Sumerian cities competed to gain his blessing to impose their supremacy. Enki reigned over the fresh waters of the Abzu, the subterranean abyss associated with aquifers nourishing the land. Sometimes called Ea in Akkadian texts, he was the master of wisdom, magic, and technical knowledge. His temples, notably in Eridu, one of the oldest cities of Sumer, were major places of worship. Enki, a benevolent god and protector of humanity, imparted knowledge and skill to artisans, priests, and scribes. In several myths, he helps humans, teaching essential rites and inventions such as irrigation, navigation, and writing. Inanna, goddess of love and war, stands out as an exception in a predominantly male pantheon. Later identified with Ishtar, she symbolizes feminine power in its contradictory aspects: tenderness and ferocity, fertility and conflict, seduction and destruction. Her cult was active in Uruk, where her main temple, Eanna, House of Heaven, received offerings such as precious textiles, agricultural products, and war spoils, reflecting her dual role in daily life and conflicts. Inanna embodied vital energy, passion, conquest, and regeneration, playing a central role in Sumerian art, poetry, and myths. To understand Sumerian temples, one must see the city as a sacred space centered around the domain of a tutelary deity. These sanctuaries, called house in Sumerian, were dedicated to specific gods: Akur for Enlil in Nippur, Eanna for Inanna in Uruk, or Abzu for Enki in Eridu. Built with dry or baked bricks, sometimes adorned with geometric mosaics, formed by colored cones inserted into the walls, these temples expanded over time, forming thick layers visible in excavations. These temples were not only places of worship, but also administrative and economic centers. The management of the gods' domains allowed for the storage and redistribution of goods, such as barley, wheat, wool, or dates. The temple employed potters, weavers, scribes, and metallurgists. Scribes, trained for several years, recorded on clay tablets the inventories of granaries, livestock accounts, and rations distributed to workers, ensuring the smooth functioning of the community while honoring the protective deity. The integration of economic and spiritual functions in a single architectural complex reflected the belief that all resources belonged first to the gods. Humans, who offered honors and goods, managed these sacred resources and received in return divine protection, prosperity of crops, and political stability. In each major city, the temple was the economic lung, a place of community gathering and identity affirmation. Among the ceremonies of the Sumerian calendar, the Eridu was the New Year festival celebrated at the beginning of the year, according to a lunisolar calendar. It generally coincided with sowing or harvest, depending on the region. These rites renewed the bond between the city, its god, and the cosmos. The priests organized processions where the divine statue was carried out of the sanctuary in a boat symbolizing the passage on primordial waters. The king, the earthly representative of divine order, reaffirmed his legitimacy. In some Akkadian Babylonian accounts, he knelt before the statue, confessed his sins, and received a sign of royal renewal. Even though the oldest Sumerian sources provide fewer details, the Akitu symbolized the regeneration of the world and the renegotiation of the divine contract. The sacred hierogamy, a ritual union between the sovereign and the goddess Inanna, or other goddesses depending on the city, ensured the fertility of the land and the prosperity of the city. This ritual, attested by Sumerian and Babylonian texts, reiterated the cosmic order, merging the masculine divine principle and the feminine creative power. The ceremony could include chants, offerings, and the staging of a symbolic carnal union. The king, often identified with Dumuzi, Inanna's mythical spouse, temporarily embodied the celestial virile principle, while the high priestess represented the goddess of universal fertility. For the city, this union guaranteed abundance of crops, multiplication of livestock, and prosperity. Around the major festivals, other more local celebrations were organized, sometimes specific to a city and its tutelary god. Processions, libations of beer and wine, animal sacrifices, or communal meals were an integral part of civic and religious life. Families, by participating in the rituals, hoped to attract the protection of the deities, health, and success. The private sphere, where each household worshipped domestic deities, mingled with the public sphere dominated by the great institutional cults. Sumerian mythology includes a rich set of stories, legends, and epics, attested to by clay tablets from the 3rd millennium before Christ. These texts, often compiled in scribe schools, recounted the creation of the world, the origin of the gods, celestial conflicts, and the exploits of semi-divine heroes. Among them, the epic of Enmerkar, the legendary king of Uruk, describes a visionary monarch seeking to establish the supremacy of his city and to unite men around a collective project. Enmerkar was in conflict with the ruler of Arata, a prosperous land known for its metals and precious stones, and asked him for materials to embellish the temple of Inanna in Uruk. These dialogues are among the first written descriptions of diplomatic dealings and politico-religious rivalries, highlighting the importance of communication for consolidating power and the spiritual role of Inanna. Another major legend linked to Inanna is that of the Hulupu tree. The goddess took in a tree uprooted by the winds and planted it in her sacred garden in Uruk. A serpent, an Impundalu bird, and the demoness Lilith settled in its branches and roots, preventing Inanna from enjoying the wood. Gilgamesh, hero and king of Uruk, killed the serpent, chased away the demoness and the bird, then offered the trunk to Inanna so that she could make a bed and a sacred throne. This myth evokes the struggle against chaos, symbolized by the creatures, the role of the civilizing hero, and the transformation of a natural element into a cultural object serving divine power. These stories taught the necessity of acting with the gods to maintain cosmic and social order. Sumerian mythology did not form a uniform corpus. Oral traditions and written versions varied according to the cities. When a city dominated politically, its narratives gained prestige and spread regionally. Conversely, a declining city saw its deity lose importance. A guiding thread connected the whole, the belief that humans were made to serve the gods and maintain the cosmic order. This tacit contract required precise rites, respect for the sacred hierarchy, and acceptance of divine wills expressed by oracles or omens. These myths, often later taken up in Akkadian literature, strongly influenced Babylonian, Assyrian narratives, and, indirectly, the entire ancient Near East. Their echoes can be found in the Epic of Gilgamesh and multiple subsequent mythological texts. The Sumerians, pioneers in writing, etched in clay a literary legacy that marked the regional cultural history for millennia. For us today, this religious universe, these sometimes complex heroes and deities, represent one of the first great human spiritual blossoms. More than 5,000 years ago, at the heart of Lower Mesopotamia, a worldview was crafted where humans could not envision their survival and prosperity except by integrating into a delicate network of divine relations where worship, ceremony, and mythical narration wove the very fabric of existence. The emergence of scientific and technical innovations in Mesopotamia between 3500 and 2000 before Christ marked a major milestone in universal history. The Sumerians, in the plains of the Tigris and Euphrates, developed advanced systems of numeration, astronomy, metallurgy, and medical care, influencing later civilizations. They devised a sexagesimal mathematical system based on the number 60 before the generalized adoption of the decimal system. This system was used to manage irrigation, distribute crops, and control agricultural stocks. The division of the circle into 360 degrees and the use of minutes and seconds to measure time partly derived from this system. Symbols engraved on clay tablets represented units and multiples of 60. They also created multiplication tables to teach calculation and used fractions such as 1/60th, 160, for the precise sharing of resources, foreshadowing complex arithmetic rules. The Sumerians were also interested in empirical astronomy to predict floods and organize agricultural calendars. Their lunisolar calendar combined lunar phases and the sun's annual trajectory, dividing the year into months and seasons suited to human activities. This method allowed temples and administrators to anticipate sowing, harvesting, and religious rites. The study of constellations sought to link celestial movements with terrestrial phenomena such as storms and droughts. These observations, though rudimentary, laid the groundwork for Babylonian and Greek astronomical advances. Tablets from Uruk and Nippur reveal celestial catalogs listing the appearances and disappearances of celestial bodies. Metallurgy and tooling were also essential. The Sumerians cast and formed various alloys, notably arsenical bronze, a mixture of copper and arsenic, offering strength and durability for tools like spearheads and hoes. This knowledge evolved towards the use of tin-enriched bronze, facilitating the casting and malleability of metal. The use of copper saws demonstrated a desire to cut wood, stone, and bone more precisely than flint blades. Workshops of blacksmiths and artisans were structured, accelerating the production of tools for intensive agriculture. The introduction of reinforced plow tips improved plowing, increasing yields and the capacity to feed the growing urban population. Alongside material progress, the Sumerians developed rudimentary medical practices accompanied by a nascent pharmacopoeia. The earliest pharmacopoeia tablets, found in religious institutions, detail curative recipes and ointments based on natural ingredients like dates, bitumen, or goat's milk, reputed for their benefits to the human body. Medicine relied on empirical knowledge of anatomy and organ function, mingled with magical religious beliefs. Some diseases were attributed to supernatural forces, hence the joint use of ritual gestures, prayers, and vegetal or organic preparations. The tablets also show an attempt to classify symptoms, to differentiate pathologies, and adapt remedies. Although little known today, These practices reveal an evolution of health and disease concepts. Bitumen served as an antiseptic, dates provided energy, and, combined with plant extracts, allowed the making of poultices to heal wounds or soothe inflammations. Milk was used in fortifying or soothing potions for digestion. These approaches, combined with rites, did not always yield measurable results by our modern standards, but testify to an early investigative spirit. The Sumerians did not just settle for inherited recipes, but sought to deepen and formalize their knowledge. The meticulous writing of medical, astronomical, or numerical tablets aimed to durably transmit information. This scientific approach, based on observation comparison and data organization, foreshadows great intellectual revolutions to come. The lexical lists of scribes also show a desire for systematic classification, laying the foundations of an organized and transmissible knowledge base that inspired many civilizations. The Sumerian legacy in mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, and medicine constitutes a crucial foundation. Their sexagesimal system, still partially used in our time measurements today, demonstrates cultural longevity. The lunisolar calendar and the observation of constellations paved the way for astrology and rational sky study. Their improved metallurgy allowed efficient land exploitation, promoting the demographic growth of city-states. Finally, the earliest medicinal tablets illustrate their curiosity about the human body and the aspiration to relieve pain and disease. These discoveries reflect the rise of a methodical thought, profoundly influencing the evolution of knowledge. In the midst of the vast floodplains of Mesopotamia, artistic expression quickly took unique forms, showcasing the ingenuity of the Sumerians. Among their creations, the lyre of Ur, a sumptuous stringed instrument, played an important role in religious and festive culture. Discovered during the 1920s, 1930s excavations at the site of Ur, it illustrates the sophistication of workshops around 2600 before Christ. Artisans used precious wood, adorned with inlays of mother-of-pearl, lapis lazuli, and shells, forming complex patterns. The gold bull's heads crowning the soundbox symbolized protective strength, a key element of Sumerian beliefs. The lyre accompanied sacred songs during ceremonies such as funerary or fertility rites, transcending mere entertainment to convey a message of harmony between humans and the divine. The construction of these lyres revealed meticulous craftsmanship. The Sumerians mastered the acoustic properties of wood to optimize resonance. The soundbox was reinforced with thin sheets of gold or bitumen, while the inlays depicted mythological scenes or daily life. The semi-precious stones recalled the link between the sacred and celestial splendor. The stylized horns of the bull emphasized the protective and fertile dimension. Several lyres were found in the royal tombs of Ur, accompanied by food offerings or jewelry, suggesting that music facilitated the passage of the deceased to the afterlife. Each chord played thus united humanity with the Sumerian pantheon. In parallel, Sumerian art also expressed itself through ceramics and votive statuary. Potters created various vessels, from utilitarian pottery to more refined pieces for rituals. The decoration, often minimalist, featured geometric or animal motifs, painted in black or red on a light background. The votive statuary, present in temples and sanctuaries, included notably the bald figures with joined hands discovered at Tel Asmar. These statues, sometimes called orants, display large expressive eyes, indicative of a constant prayer to the deities. These orants in limestone, alabaster, or gypsum reflect an intense spiritual approach. Their shaved skull and wide eyes reflect a permanent commitment to the gods. Often, they carried inscriptions indicating the name of the sponsor or the deity dedicated. Installed in the temples, these figurines perpetuated the prayer in the absence of the devotee, ensuring an uninterrupted spiritual presence. The sense of community, essential in Mesopotamia, was reinforced. The individual entrusted their representation to the sanctuary, thus integrating into a collective practice. The use of votive statuary also reveals the importance of social hierarchy, with size and ornamentation reflecting the means of the sponsor. Art, religion, and politics coalesced into a coherent whole in Sumerian society. Simultaneously, Sumerian culture flourished in song and oral poetry. Hymns, recited or sung, honored the protective deities. The hymn to Ninkasi, dedicated to the goddess of beer, illustrates this tradition. This deity embodied fermentation and economic prosperity, essential to nutrition and sociability. Beer, brewed from barley or cereals, was central to banquets and offerings. The hymn describes the brewing process while invoking Ninkasi, blending divine praise with daily gestures, making the beverage a symbol of cohesion. This sacred poetry also illustrates Sumerian literary richness. The temple litanies followed precise protocols. Priests and worshippers sang them during festivals marking the renewal of the earth, or to implore divine clemency against threats. The repeated refrains anchored the sacred word in the collective unconscious, reinforcing the link between the population and deity. Instruments like the lyre and harp accompanied these rituals, imposing a solemn atmosphere. Sometimes the songs were accompanied by codified dances, enhancing the religious experience. Partially discovered epigraphic tablets confirm the variety of these compositions intended for gods, heroes, or semi-divine rulers. Sumerian singing was a cultural foundation, expressing communal attachment and devotion. To approach the origin of the epic, one must delve into the oral roots of the Sumerian tradition. Before being written on clay tablets, storytellers and poets roamed the cities, recounting the exploits of founding heroes and the adventures of the gods. These stories were passed down from generation to generation, enriching over time. Some drafts of the Epic of Gilgamesh were already circulating in the form of songs, depicting legendary rulers of Uruk. The scribe played a fundamental role. They fixed poetic fragments in writing to preserve collective memory. They collected, reorganized, and transcribed the verses into pictograms and then into proto-cuneiform signs, ensuring the permanence of the narrative. This slow development resulted in a literary corpus, influencing subsequent civilizations. The spoken word, sung and then consigned to writing, thus laid the foundations of the Mesopotamian epic. During the early dynastic III period, from 2600 to 2350 before Christ, the Sumerian civilization experiences its golden age. Royal power consolidates, some cities thrive, and extended trade networks develop. The city-states of Sumer, governed by local rulers, compete for political, economic, and religious supremacy in the fertile plain of Lower Mesopotamia. This flourishing period reveals a complex society where writing, urban planning, art, and labor organization reach their zenith. Lagash, and Uruk stand out for their architectural achievements, religious practices, and powerful dynasties. These developments are part of a continuity of religious, technical, and diplomatic traditions that shape the ancient Near East. Located near the mouth of the Persian Gulf, witnesses the rise of Mesopotamia around the mid-3rd millennium. His reign, evidenced by numerous tablets and seals, marks a decisive step for the power of Ur. Excavations in the Royal Cemetery of Ur reveal remarkable opulence. Tombs containing harps made of precious wood inlaid with mother-of-pearl, finely crafted gold jewelry, and luxury vessels, attesting to an economy mobilizing rare resources. This wealth is based on both maritime and land routes, notably an alliance with Dilmun, modern-day Bahrain, facilitating the importation of exotic materials such as copper and organic substances like incense. Under Mesopotamia, diplomacy takes on a new dimension. Ur establishes strong ties with other Sumerian cities and partners beyond Mesopotamia. The ruler asserts his authority by inscribing his name on tablets, commemorating offerings to the gods, notably Nana, the moon god and patron of Ur. The political organization of Ur rests on a precise hierarchy, with scribes managing granaries, stewards supervising cereal stocks, and goldsmiths crafting objects for worship. This flourishing economy and these regional alliances make Ur a major hub of Sumerian power, consolidating the reputation of Mesopotamia as an exemplary head of state. Eannatum of Lagash, a city to the east, rules at the same time as Mesopotamia. His reign is marked by the Stele of the Vultures, discovered in Girsu, the religious and administrative center of Lagash. This sculpted stone recounts a military victory against Umma, showing disciplined Sumerian soldiers armed with spears and shields in tight ranks. This monument bears witness to the emergence of an organized army, illustrating the Sumerians' ability to plan coordinated campaigns. The reliefs also emphasize Eannatum's legitimacy, as he imposes his authority by regulating cadastral boundaries. The conflicts with Umma concern fertile lands and irrigation canals, vital resources requiring collective hydraulic management. Thanks to this stele, the concept of border appears, formalized by boundary stones or administrative inscriptions. Eannatum establishes a network of sanctuaries in Lagash dedicated to local deities, notably Ningirsu, the warrior god, showing the importance of religion in state cohesion. The redistribution of land, the maintenance of irrigation, and the supervision of collective projects reflect a centralization aimed at uniting the population under a single power. However, society remains hierarchical, with the sovereign as the central pivot. Gilgamesh is a name that has traversed millennia and left a mark on the universal imagination. Mentioned in Sumerian royal lists, he ruled over Uruk towards the latter half of the 3rd millennium before Christ. At that time, Uruk was a prosperous city near the Euphrates, benefiting from a vital canal network for agriculture and trade. Tradition attributes to him the construction of imposing enclosures whose remains show an elaborate defensive system. The Epic of Gilgamesh celebrates his exploits, notably his quest for immortality. While some elements are legendary, historical events may lie within, notably hydraulic works for canals and dikes, ensuring the prosperity and security of the kingdom. Uruk then experienced significant artistic and administrative vitality. Infrastructures, considered temple banks, served as both religious centers and storage facilities for barley, oil, and fish. Scribes used an advanced proto-cuneiform to record transactions and offerings. The presence of specialized craftsmen, stonecutters, metallurgists, goldsmiths, weavers, attests to the city's renown. The reign of Gilgamesh symbolizes the splendor of Uruk and makes it a lasting cultural reference. At this time, Mesopotamia was largely connected to long-distance trade networks, forming what some historians call the Mesopotamian world system. Cuneiform tablets and archaeological discoveries show the circulation of precious objects and raw materials from distant regions. Magan, corresponding to present-day Oman, supplied copper for tools and arsenical bronze weapons. Meluha, likely the Indus Valley in present-day Pakistan, exported exotic woods and decorative stones. Marhashi, in eastern Iran, provided metals and connected Mesopotamia to the interior plateaus. The Sumerians exported barley, linen textiles, sesame oil, and various processed products, including beer, a ritual and daily beverage. Caravans of donkeys or oxen transported the goods overland, while lightweight square-sailed boats navigated the Euphrates, Tigris, or Persian Gulf. Downstream ports ensured the transshipment and redistribution of distant goods. This trade stimulated innovation. Cylinder seals attested to the origin and quality of products, clay tablets standardized for accounts, and proto-cuneiform writing advanced. In this interconnected network, the prestige of Uruk, or Lagash, was measured by their ability to import rare materials and turn them into luxury items. Exchanges were not limited to material goods. Ideas, techniques, and religious practices also circulated. Gulf artisans sometimes adopted Mesopotamian motifs to decorate vases or seals, creating a shared artistic language. The presence of bilingual scribes in some tablets testifies to foreign minorities or negotiation experts. All these dynamics made Sumer a major hub attracting external goods and know-how. By the end of the early dynastic III period, Sumerian society reached unparalleled complexity. Administrative texts show a strict social hierarchy. At the top, royal and noble families held lands and power, legitimized by founding myths. Next were the religious officials, called prebendaries, receiving rations, provided by the temple managing offerings and harvests. Specialized craftsmen also held an enviable position, producing ceramics, metal tools, jewelry, luxury clothing, and ceremonial instruments. Workers subjected to compulsory labor, a free population, built and maintained public infrastructures, receiving rations of cereals, oil, and wool, but their status remained fragile. Below them, some were reduced to slavery, often due to debts or wars, entirely dependent on their masters. The functioning of the economy required the participation of all, with registers detailing housing and food according to task or rank. Prosperity was accompanied by innovations in public health and urban hygiene. In remains show rudimentary sewage systems. In affluent houses, installations managed wastewater. Archives indicated growing awareness of sanitation, with measures to balance water consumption, agricultural use, and rituals. Better access to drinking water and improved hygiene practices contributed to demographic stability and the well-being of a portion of the population. These infrastructures reflect the growing control of the royal administration and temples over daily life. Scribes, essential for managing stocks of grains, livestock, and mineral resources, develop complex methods, number grids, markings on tablets, and base 60 numeration. This specialization strengthens the centralization of power, enabling long-term planning, such as the construction of canals or ditches recorded in the archives. The city thus reinforces its cohesion and influence. The great Sumerian families invest in religious patronage, building or renovating monumental temples to ensure the goodwill of the gods. The ceremonies, organized according to a lunar and seasonal calendar, bring the community together around collective rites. Offerings of food, fabrics, and livestock are redistributed, symbolizing the generosity of the sovereign or high priesthood and reinforcing the dependency of the faithful. The kings assert their role as privileged mediators between mortals and gods. Despite significant inequalities, the Sumerian peak is characterized by intense cultural creativity and relatively stable cohesion. Decorative arts, music, and poetry flourish, stimulated by wealth. Construction sites multiply, with each city erecting buildings dedicated to tutelary deities or royal prestige. Trade corridors facilitate the circulation of artisanal techniques and ornamental styles. In the tombs of notables, one finds fine accessories, gold ornaments, Afghan lapis lazuli jewelry, and sometimes copper utensils from Oman. The Sumerians also perfected sophisticated administrative tools. The legal texts, still embryonic, foreshadow future legislative codes. Royal judgments or councils of elders are recorded on tablets, initiating a jurisprudence. The progressive establishment of criteria for judging conflicts and offenses reflects the desire to maintain social order and political stability in expanding states. Beyond military or religious force, reliance on written rules is established to consolidate the legitimacy of power. At the twilight of this prosperous century, the Sumerian cities remain dynamic, but rivalries intensify. Ambitions clash with the scarcity of certain resources, causing conflicts for access to water and raw materials. The Sumerian civilization emerges transformed. Its urban structure, religious hierarchy, and technological innovations profoundly mark Mesopotamian history and inspire other political entities in the Near East. The legacy of Mesopotamia, Eannatum, Gilgamesh, and their peers is manifested in the development of cities, efficient administrative mechanisms, and the collective memory preserved by the oldest written narratives. This golden age, a prelude to new dynastic evolutions, is a fundamental milestone for understanding the rise of the Sumerian state, which gave birth to one of the first urban civilizations despite climatic and political challenges. At the heart of the prosperity of the Sumerian Golden Age, between the mid-3rd millennium before Christ and the end of the early dynastic period around 2350. Before Christ, a complex institutional system is established, associating two major poles, the temple and the palace. The temple, the symbolic residence of the city's main god, plays an essential economic role, managing agricultural lands and supervising the distribution of rations of grains, oil, and fabrics. Scribes, trained in cuneiform writing, record the inflows and outflows of these goods on tablets. This accounting conceals a hierarchical network of stewards and officials, ensuring distribution to craftsmen. The palace, residence of the Lugal or king, embodies political and military authority, also relying on scribes to record its vital resources, metals, luxury products. Temple and palace remain distinct in their spiritual and administrative functions, but unite to ensure the prosperity of the city. Within this organization, the idea of a legal framework emerges to regulate power relations. Long before Hammurabi's code, around 1800 peaked. Before Christ, the cuneiform tradition mentions older legal models, nicknamed proclamations of peace. Among them is the Code of Ur-Nanshe, the founding sovereign of the first dynasty of Lagash, around 2500 before Christ, who published rules concerning the resolution of territorial conflicts and the management of commercial disputes. These texts, far from being codified laws, testify to a desire to regularize sanctions and negotiate peace in a tense military and economic context. Expanding diplomacy and international relations becomes a major concern. Alongside border treaties and non-aggression pacts, rulers exchanged sumptuous gifts to solidify their alliances. Among the prized items are live lion cubs, symbols of strength and prestige, offered as a sign of lasting friendship. Other gifts, such as finely crafted gold jewelry, highlight the mastery of Sumerian artisans. These luxurious items reflect the prosperity of cities like Ur or Lagash, taking advantage of trade networks to the Persian Gulf, present-day Oman, or the Indus Valley. This prestige diplomacy enhances the reputation of opulence and benevolence of the rulers among neighboring powers. As Sumerian influence extends to the surrounding regions, this institutional and cultural dynamic reverberates far beyond the Mesopotamian plain. The first major imprint concerns writing, whose evolution durably shapes the history of communication. Initially pictographic, Sumerian writing gradually becomes proto-cuneiform and then classical cuneiform. From the 24th century before Christ, Akkadian kings and administrators adopt these signs and adapt them to their Semitic language. This results in frequent bilingualism in scribal schools, where both Sumerian, a scholarly language, and Akkadian, a more common language in exchanges, are taught. This massive diffusion standardizes administrative practices, formalizes international treaties, and leads to the emergence of large royal libraries, the basis of regional knowledge. Sumerian hydraulic techniques are another major legacy to the ancient Near East. The construction and maintenance of canals to irrigate lands, along with the establishment of dikes and reservoirs, profoundly influenced later kingdoms. Babylon inherits a complex organization of canals perfected to manage floods and distribute water to fields. Further north, Assyria relies on this know-how to transform semi-arid areas into fertile lands. This technical transfer also influences social organization, as water mastery reinforces the centralization of power and highlights the role of administrators responsible for collecting taxes in kind and planning the workforce for maintenance. Finally, Sumerian urban architecture, centered on the main temple and often complemented by a monumental ziggurat, durably inspires the cities of Elam, Mari, and Ebla. The ziggurat, a stepped tower, serves as a cult center and visual landmark, indicating the presence of a tutelary deity and the high status of the city. Adopted urban plans place places of worship and royal residences within fortified enclosures, with artisan and merchant quarters beyond. At Mari, on the middle Euphrates, excavations have revealed a sumptuous palace with frescoes blending local traditions and Mesopotamian heritage. At Ebla, in western Syria, the early use of cuneiform writing testifies to this cultural affiliation, crossing borders and linguistic barriers to shape a vast civilized space. To manage these distinct and sometimes competing institutions, a group of officials and advisors gravitates around the ruler and the high priest. The scribe occupies a central place, mastering calculation techniques, writing, and court protocol. The tablets unearthed at several sites testify to the extent of their missions: livestock inventories, soldier censuses, grain accounting, topographical surveys. Scribes, often from specialized lineages, are trained in tablet schools, where the art of cuneiform is learned with a reed stylus. This mastery of writing gives them indirect power, as they ensure the conservation and dissemination of information. When it comes to sealing a political agreement or a judicial decision, the scribe guarantees the validity and permanence of the official document. Diplomacy is not limited to the exchange of gifts. Marital ties between city-states strengthen strategic alliances. It is not uncommon for a ruler to marry a princess from another city to ensure mutual loyalty and prevent conflicts. As a sign of good relations, caravans loaded with precious textiles, rare metals, or exotic animals cross the desert and traverse the floodplains. The arrival of live lion cubs often amazes local populations who are not used to handling these formidable felines. Owning a lion is a symbol of victory over the wild and a demonstration of military power. These exchanges and diplomatic gifts are part of a system where the prestige and prosperity of a city are measured as much by the quality of its religious rituals as by the splendor of its host, capable of entertaining dignitaries and emissaries. Through the balance between religious authority and royal power, these institutional, legal, and cultural innovations have shaped a model that still influences the ancient Near East, preparing the ground for the great empires to come. This impetus will extend well beyond, influencing urban planning and institutions of many emerging civilizations, a political legacy that reshapes human history.